Hello everyone, my name is Shanae Jones and this is KNKY, which stands for Know the New Kinky You. I'm a certified sex coach, certified through Sex Coach University, and a member of the World Association of Sex Coaches. It is my job to help couples and individuals get to know who they are as sexual beings so that they can position themselves to have the best sex of their lives. And you might question why this is so important, but sex is the foundation of our existence. It's how we are made. So although it is a function of biology, it's something that we should learn to enjoy and learn to master just like any other skill. So I want to talk to you because not every conversation we're going to have is going to be a lesson about our personal selves. And in this, I want us to reflect on people who work in sex as a business, as a trade. So a sex worker, and we're going to do a 4-part series on this so that hopefully you guys get a better idea about who these people are and how they get to be in the situations that they're in. So our first part, we're going to talk about the oldest profession in the world, which is prostitution. So it's been around for ages, since, some say the days of Christ, and it's definitely not anything new, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. But in my research, there is speculation that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, and this is somebody who was very close to Jesus. What I found in some accounts is that there was a woman named Mary of Bethany that was the woman of sin, and the woman of sin is considered the prostitute. Now, whether it was Mary Magdalene or Mary of Bethany, I think the bigger point is that in the Bible, women who have sex for money are cast off as having created a sin or having participated in a sin. Now, we have to really ask ourselves, what is a prostitute? Now, by definition, is the practice or occupation of engaging in sexual activity with someone for payment. Now, this definition does not dictate sexual orientation or sexual identity. It is purely transactional, right? So from some viewpoints, most everyday dating could be considered some level of prostitution, because there are instances, and this is not everyone, but there are instances where people go out with the expectation that they're going to get a meal, or they're going to go see a movie or a play or concert or something, and at the end of that, they get sex. It's an exchange, it's a transaction. Now, because we don't understand the different levels, or not to say we don't understand, but because we haven't accounted for the different levels of prostitution, at its merest basic level, that type of dating transaction could technically be defined as not saying prostitute, but it could be dictated as prostitution based just on the technical definition. So when we go from just the dating and we get into more specific, we have to understand that there are different viewpoints with most of how we consider prostitution in our day-to-day system. It could be something like we talked about as a bartering system, or it could be something a little bit more extreme. And when we're talking about the transaction, it's literally cash in hand, sex had, and we moved on, right? No emotion, no feeling, no anything like that. Purely transactional. So what we have to see is that there are different reasons why prostitution exists. So for some people, the reason why it exists for some people are socially awkward and they don't know how to engage in interpersonal relationships and conversations. So trying to establish relationships can be a little bit harder. There are also others who just don't want to work that hard, and they want to accomplish that transaction with as little complication as possible. So in that regard, I'm talking about the person that's seeking out the services of a prostitute, whereas the prostitute themselves can find themselves in that position for a number of different reasons. It could be that, they need money, which is typically it, but whether or not they are in school and trying to pay tuition, or they are perhaps a struggling drug addict and they need to find money to support themselves. It's very circumstantial as to how people end up in these situations. What we have to understand is that when you're finding yourself in this position, nobody wakes up and says, hey, I want to be a prostitute. Nobody does that. So you would have to think that this person is in this position because they really and truly felt that there was no other way to get them to where they needed to be, to have a sense of security and to create an income stream that would support them and perhaps their families. Now, the majority of prostitutes are going to be female. However, it's not a strictly female, feminine job, right? It can be a man or a woman or a transgender person. Anybody can sell themselves for sex. And hopefully, as you're listening to this, you're starting to understand that all of these people who find themselves in this situation are just people. And just like you have people who live their life in a path that got them to extreme riches through business or real estate or through sports or entertainment, they had a path. Not everybody gets those same opportunities. So we can't necessarily judge them based off of the path that led them to where they are. Now, there are different levels of prostitution, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. So what we have is an independent call girl or an escort, right? So this is somebody who works for themselves. They set their own hours. They do their own bookings. They usually work in a hotel or a private building, or they have a house somewhere where they can, or a location somewhere that they can engage in sexual activity. Now, they tend to be, I want to say, of a higher class because they aren't, well, we're going to talk about streetwalkers, but they aren't people that you can just go out and pick. You have to kind of look for them, research them. They'll have online postings. They'll have things that are of a little bit more caliber. But basically, they are self-employed and they keep 100% of the profits, right? But there are some challenges to working as a independent call girl. First and foremost, you have to be able to qualify your prices. So why should I pay $500 an hour for you versus $50 for an hour with this other person? So you have to kind of qualify the differences. You also have to make sure that you are building your clientele. So you don't get to work off of anyone else. You're basically self-promoting. So you have to make sure that whatever you're selling is something that other people want to buy. You also have escorts, but these escorts, instead of being independent, they work for a escort service. Now, when you work for an escort agency is basically an organized pimp, right? They have established a business where they are an umbrella company where they have a bunch of different independent employees, right? So you are a representative of the escort agency. So therefore, they're doing that additional legwork for you where they are helping to do the marketing and building up the clientele list and doing the back and forth to bring patrons to you versus you doing it all on your own. And therefore, they get a cut of the profit, right? it could work. There are pros and cons, but that's for people to evaluate. You also have brothels. Now, a brothel is different because it's a dedicated place where you can go and you can pick out the different, typically ladies that are available, and you can just pick whoever suits your fancy, right? So there are some benefits to this because there are, if you're the John especially, they're usually a little bit more fairly priced, so not as high as the escorts. But at the same time, you want to make sure that where you're going is reputable, right? So I'm sure most of you have heard of the Bunny Ranch in Nevada. Now, this is an example of a brothel. Now, let me say, in the United States, prostitution is illegal. And Nevada is the only state where legal prostitution is allowed. But it's not allowed everywhere across Nevada. It is only in 7 of the 16 counties where they have active brothels. So, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go. It's a really fun place to be. As you're walking the strip, there are what I call flickers, and I wish I had something to kind of show you. So basically, picture these little cards, and there are people lined up on the street, and they're flicking them, flicking them, flicking them, flicking them. And basically, these are escort services that are promoting dancers or companionship or anything like that, but they're escort services. And so you'll see the street kind of like littered with these little pamphlets. But in Vegas, prostitution is illegal. So if you go to Vegas and you're interested in visiting a brothel, I would suggest you go to one of the sanctioned brothels that are in one of the 7 of 16 counties where you can go research. Okay. Oh, I will mention that currently I live in Washington, D.C., and there is a law being proposed to legalize prostitution. Now, I would like to hear your opinion on legalized prostitution. There are definitely different people on different sides of the equation that feel what they feel. So I encourage you to read more about it and formulate an opinion and comment on this video and let me know what it is that you think. Alright, so next we have what you would call more prevalent in the Amsterdam area, where if you had to picture this, it probably makes more sense to you. And you have a red light district. And this red light district is where you have a city where you can kind of walk around, and the prostitutes are actually displayed in windows. So as you're walking through, you have these establishments, and in these large pane windows you have women, you know, seductively dressed and, you know, dancing and moving kind of to entice you to come in and procure services. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to this type of level of prostitution. The biggest disadvantage is that, one, they're paid lower than all of the other types of prostitutes that we have talked about. And there's also a level of, what do you call, isolation, where you would think that, you know, in a brothel you have a social aspect where you have multiple people kind of hanging around and, you know, being able to engage with each other, where when you are this window worker, you're in your window, somebody comes in, you're in your room, you go back to your window. There's very little interaction from a social aspect. The advantage, if there was one, was that you're not a streetwalker. You do have some level of, I have a secure place to engage in my activities. I have some place to, I can feel comfortable or create a little bit of a niche about where it is that I am and how do I engage and have your personal comforts of sorts. So if anything, that could be considered an advantage. There's also what you call a bar or a casino worker. Now, if you know me at all, you know that I'm a big fan of the Big Bang Theory. And anytime I get an opportunity to inject anything that I've seen or learned from the Big Bang Theory, I will do that. So, excuse me if you're not a fan. But imagine this scenario. You have Howard Wolowitz, who is one of the guys that is heartbroken from a recent breakup from a woman who is actually considered to be just a booty call, but he was upset. So his friends say, hey, you're down in the dumps, let's get you to Vegas. So they go to Vegas and they're at the bar. Well, actually Howard decides to stay in the room because he's still sad, but Leonard and Raj go down to the bar. And as they're in the bar, this very attractive woman walks up to them and it's like, hey, do you want to party? And Raj, being very, very gullible, says, well, yes, I'd like to party. I want to party. And so Leonard taps him and says, hey, I think party means that she's a prostitute and she wants to get paid for sex. And Raj doesn't believe it. So, they excuse themselves from the young lady. And later on they go back and they walk up to her and they say, are you a prostitute? And she says, are you a cop? And she says, well, they say no. And she says, well, yeah, I'm a prostitute. And so they start to talk and they're like, well, our friend is here and he's down and we want to give him the girlfriend experience. Okay, so basically they pay her to be a nice Jewish girl who happens to be attracted to this tiny little man who's heartbroken. Now, the part that I find interesting is, one, this is how this transaction goes. So if you go to a bar, you go to a casino, and you kind of see these beautiful, lonely, straggling women, it does not mean that they are prostitutes, but it means that they could be, perhaps. But to a certain degree, and we'll talk about it more in a later video, but engaging in a prostitute or engaging with a prostitute isn't necessarily just about the sex. It's also about the fantasy. Sometimes people want things that they either don't feel that they can get from their partner, or they don't want to do with their partner for various reasons. It could be that they feel some level of shame about what it is that they want to do, and going to somebody that you don't have an emotional connection with, where the act itself is purely transactional, you take away the risk of rejection. You take away the risk of being humiliated and laughed at. So just understand that although the act itself is transactional, there is usually some type of an emotional tie that brings both parties to the situation. So, of all the types of prostitutes that we talked about, the one we talk about next is by far the most dangerous, where you have these prostitutes that walk up and down the street and they are actively seeking clientele. And in most large cities, you kind of know where these places are, where I call them host rolls. It's like you know where to go find a prostitute. Like back in the day in Washington, D.C., going to 14th Street Northwest was nothing, and that was where you definitely go to find a prostitute. And depending on where you are in the city, there are different types. So you can go to a part of the city if you wanted to find transgender prostitutes or male prostitutes. You can find anything anywhere if you know where to look. I'm not encouraging you to go look. I'm just telling you that that is the case. So part of the problem with streetwalkers, and this is not a public shaming on them, but they could be working independently or they could be working for a pimp. And I'm sure that you probably understand some of the ramifications when you're doing either. So if you're independent and you encroach on someone else's territory to solicit customers, there could be some very serious consequences for that, because you just don't do it. If you have a pimp, you're accountable to somebody else, and the majority of the money that you earn goes to them, and you have to meet quotas that they establish. So it's about how much money you can make for them, not how much money you can make for yourself. Also, there have been some very serious consequences as it relates to prostitutes being killed. Now, one of the reasons why this is the case is because prostitutes are seen as easy victims. They're usually without a whole lot of family. They may not have a permanent residence. They may not have somebody looking for them. And at least in recent years, they were just not a high priority on law enforcement's list of cases to solve, of all the things that they had to deal with. So in a lot of ways, they were taken advantage of. So Jack the Ripper is very famous in London. He walked around, stabbing young prostitutes. Then you have Gary Ridgway, who was from Seattle, known as the Green River Killer. He is accused of killing 48 sex workers from 1982 to 1988. He is quoted as saying, and I'm going to read this one directly. He is quoted as saying, "I picked prostitutes as victims because they were easy to pick up without being noticed. I knew they would not be reported missing. I picked prostitutes because I thought I could kill as many of them as I wanted without getting caught." Robert Henson is believed to have killed between 17 and possibly more than 30 sex workers around Anchorage, Alaska between 1980 and 1983. Tragically, there are definitely more examples of these types of prolific serial killers who preyed upon prostitutes. The bottom line is that I don't believe that prostitutes are people that got into that lifestyle because it was their life stream. It's not the case. There are many factors that help drive them there, and most of them are financially driven. What you want to take away from this, though, is that whether it's to take care of your family or perhaps to support an addiction, being a prostitute or working as a sex worker does not deny you human rights. It doesn't deny that person human rights. You still have to demand respect and to be treated with general human kindness. Abuse and exploitation of prostitution and sex workers in general is something that should not be tolerated, because in a lot of ways these people are victims of circumstance, and to judge them too harshly is condemning. And in a lot of ways, it's just like somebody coming out of jail and trying to restart their lives. If you were a former sex worker and you're trying to reestablish yourself, you have this brand against you that people kind of hold on to. If we start to talk about legalization of prostitution everywhere, then it removes the negative stigma around sex work. There are protections that can be had for sex workers against people that do sex trafficking, which we'll talk about a little bit in the next video, but it'll protect against those things. Now again, there's a difference between sex work as a prostitute and sexual trafficking, and the key word there is consent. So we'll go back to our earlier date reference. If you're a woman who goes out on a date and spends time with a man for clothes and cars and food, and you do this with the expectation of having sex or getting money for the exchange of having sex, by definition, you're a prostitute. So we've all done it. We go out. This is what we do. And men, you're Johns and all of that because you want to go out and you expect to spend money on a woman, and in exchange for that you want sex. The primary difference is in this transactional state, you've cut out all of the fluff and social niceties and said, here's money, I want sex. So think about it in terms of most of us and how we interact and deal with our day-to-day lives are not much different than how these other sexual transactions between a prostitute and a John happen. So I just want to remind you that there are a lot of things that help to influence who we are and how we become better people, and understanding that living our lives without putting labels on other people is probably one of the better things we can do as human beings, especially negative labels. We just don't want to create that. So it's our opportunity to learn more about who these people are and how they get into their circumstances before we start to judge them for the things that they have done and the things that they currently do. So that is our spill on the baselines of prostitution. I'm Sinead Jones. This is KNKY. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like. Don't forget to subscribe. And for those of you who have already subscribed, thank you very much. Tell a friend. Spread the word. You can follow me across all social media at DOYOUKNKY. I will see you all again next time. Don't forget to listen to the next parts of the series on this particular topic. See you again. Have a good day.